I was touring with Marty Wilde in one of the late 1950 rock and roll shows called Extravaganza. It was a long tour. It was one night of theatres, mainly at the Essoldo circuit, and our second to last theatre was the Birkenhead Essoldo. I think the date was the 2nd of October 1958, my memory serves me right. And Marty and I were sharing a dressing room, and as was the norm, at 4 o'clock we'd have a sound check, which in those days was just a tap on the microphone and 1, 2, hello, hello, and that would be it. If the mic was working, that was your sound check. So off I went to get a Wimpy bar, or to a Wimpy bar to get a Wimpy, which is the old-fashioned McDonald's, precursor to McDonald's. And whilst I was walking out of the stage door, I walked out and I bumped into a young lad who was wearing a coat, a gabardine coat with his collar turned up, looking very much like a cross between Elvis Presley and James Dean. Very good looking guy, appeared to be very shy, and he asked me in a quite broad Scouse accent if Mr. Parnes was in the theatre. Well, Mr. Parnes was Larry Parnes, who was the manager for Tommy Steele, Marty Wilde, and myself at that time. We were the only ones he had then. And I said that he was, and it was unusual for Larry to go to the far north of England. He liked to keep down south where he didn't have to travel so far, but he was there. And he'd been in the dressing room that Marty and I were sharing earlier. And so I said to this young man, I said, well, can I tell him who's looking for him? And he said, well, my name's Ronald Wycherley, and I sent him some tapes of some songs I'd written, and I'd like to know if he's listened to them. So I went in the theatre, and I mentioned this to Larry, and he said, well, fetch him in. So I went, I said to the young man, well, Mr. Parnes is in, and he'd like to see you. So in we went, and we went into a dressing room that was, I wouldn't say it was luxury. The walls were gloss green paint, and it was very uninviting, to be quite honest, but it was a dressing room. And Marty and I were sharing it, and we had a door through to the next dressing room, which was the one that Marty's Wildcats, his backing group, were in. So I introduced Ronnie to Larry, and from then on Larry did all the talking, and it finished up where Larry invited Ronnie to sing a song. So although he brought a guitar with him, he actually borrowed the committee guitar of Kenny Packwood, who was a guitarist for Marty Wilde. He was a Hofner president, I believe, or a Hofner committee guitar. And Billy played Maybe Tomorrow. Now, he was very, very good looking. He looked very sensual. He was obviously very photogenic. And he sang this song, and we all stood there. Now, the thing was, in those days, very, very few people, if any, artist-wise, wrote their own material. 90% of it was from America. Nobody at this time had really written their own song and recorded it and had a hit. And he played Maybe Tomorrow first, then he played Margo Don't Go. And there were girls outside of the theatre who were always there at stage door time before the show, getting autographs and bringing us presents and cards, etc. And what we did then was, we decided that, or Larry decided that the screaming that these girls were putting out was way above the norm. And he looked at Billy and said, how would you like to go on the show tonight? So, Ronnie was taken aback. And indeed, he went on the stage that night. He was introduced by a gentleman, another guy who was doing an audition for Larry, who was Jimmy Tarbuck. So they had two future greats being auditioned at the same time, one introducing the other. Billy was there. When the curtains opened, the audience went crazy. He looked great. Once again, he borrowed Kenny's guitar. There was a band behind him, which was the John Barry Seven. And of course, John Barry went on to much bigger and better things with film scores such as James Bond and loads of big shows. And then what happened was Larry obviously decided this is something special. He had given him the name Billy Fury already. There are stories that he didn't, but he did. He went on, did the show, came off, and Larry said, I'll sign you up. The following day, we picked Billy up at a bus stop, and his brother there, Albie, was there to see him off, and Billy got on with his suitcase. That night, he went on the stage as Billy Fury. There was a big sign in the foyer, which was the first sign ever about Billy Fury, saying, welcome to the new teenage rage, Billy Fury. He went on, he stole the show. He was absolutely brilliant. This time, John Barry did play some backing for him. We stayed in the Midland Hotel in Manchester, And the following day we all flew down to London. We didn't have a very good flight from Billy's point of view because he was using the little brown bag all the time. But we went to London, we got to London, to Larry's flat where I lived, and Billy and I finished up being flatmates. Billy was a very, very special guy in many ways. He was very quiet, extremely quiet. He was very, very polite. He always reminded me of Elvis. Elvis was a very southern boy. He used to refer to people as sir and ma'am. And Billy was very similar. And it was a natural thing. He hadn't copied any of Elvis's mannerisms, he just did. And he was a lovely man. And I drove him around for a while when he first got there to show him around. And we had a lot of good times together. And of course he liked pets. And there was a time when we lived in Gloucester Road, which is where we did live at Lindsay House, number 7. We had the 3rd floor penthouse suite. It was a suite, believe you me. We did have 2 dogs. I had a Labrador called Shane, and he had a boxer. And I can't remember the boxer's name. I think it was Brandy or something such as that. But he loved his pets. He absolutely loved his pets. We got into a lot of mischief in our nearly a year together. There's more in my book, if you like to purchase the book, Vince Eager's Rock and Roll Files, quick plug. But there is a lot about Billy in there, but I won't tell you now because you think I'm telling tales. I don't mind writing them, but not telling them. So he was a very special guy to live with. Now, I often wonder with Billy, had I not gone out of the theatre for a wimpy, had he not approached me, and had I not got into the theatre to see Larry, would Billy Fury have ever been born? I was talking to Ronald Wycherley. I think he would, there's no question. Anyone with the talent that Billy had wouldn't have got under the showbiz radar. He would for sure would have been discovered. And I think the great thing about Billy is, when you look back, I last saw Billy at Marty's This Is Your Life in 1983. And of course he was a very, very poorly guy. We should have toured together in the 70s, but he went in for one of his heart operations, and so the tour was cancelled. But he was a lovely, lovely man. He was always, as I say, so polite, and he certainly wouldn't have got under the radar. His The Sound of Fury album is one that whoever you talk to in showbiz, even to these days, even young people who are into that type of music, still consider it to be the best rock and roll album ever produced in Britain. Jack Good, who produced it, Joe Brown was a guitarist, Big Jim Sullivan was a guitarist. These guys hold Billy in such high affection, and these are artists who are at the top of their game. Marty Wilde remained a very, very dear friend of Billy's, and when Billy had a few problems later in life, it would be Marty. I was living in America, it would be Marty he picked the phone up to, and I know one night Marty went and collected Billy from Billy's home in the early hours of the morning because he was so upset. He was a very, very genuine guy. He didn't have a temper, and he was a gentleman that I really do consider to have been very privileged in not only being the first to meet him, which was a special treat for me in hindsight, but also to have known him and had some really, really good times living with him. So enjoy your evening. The greatest rock and roller Britain's produced. His music's going to entertain you.
Thank you very much, Vince. That was absolutely magnificent.